Well, science is fantastic, and no doubt it has led to huge advances in society in terms of our health and comfort. But it's not without its problems. And a lot of those problems are the same as we see in society today, sadly. It's why we need to do science in community and keep each other honest. So some of the problems are the same as the rest of society faces. You know, gender and age and race bias. Look in your science books. Who do you see? It's a bunch of old white men. And a lot of that has to do with the history of science and where it started, but a lot of it sadly persists to this day. There's been cases of unethical behavior and poor treatment of not only animals, but other human beings. The famous Tuskegee experiment, there was 600 black men in Alabama studied for syphilis, and basically doctors watched and let them go through the course of their lives without giving them treatment, just to see what syphilis would do. I mean, that's not right. Most of that stuff, I hope, is coming to an end or has come to an end, but some of it still persists. Recently I was reading about bird names and people wanting to change the names of birds because some of them are named after people, and those people didn't have a real nice past, and so they don't want to call them the Scots Oriole because they really didn't appreciate Scott and what he stood for. So there are plenty of problems that are just like everybody else. And just like everyone else, scientists have their pride. They like to be right. I mean, do you like to be wrong? No, and neither does anybody else. So even though science is supposed to be open to change and scrutiny, scientists are people. And so they hold on to their ideas. They defend them. And they get a little grouchy when people say, there's probably a better idea. And granted, some ideas seem weird. Lynn Margulis proposed the idea of Endosymbiosis Theory in the mid-1900s. This was the idea that our mitochondria and the chloroplasts in plants, these little organelles, were actually alien beings. Well, not exactly aliens. They were bacteria captured by cells and basically held hostage there. I mean, that seems strange, doesn't it? And people thought it was a really strange idea and kind of dismissed it, but evidence mounted, and now it's actually a pretty well accepted idea. Sometimes issues are not with the science itself, but what's done with it, the technology. Think of Alfred Nobel, invented basically the technology that became TNT, or dynamite. Was put to some very good uses, some very bad uses as well. He wasn't satisfied with that and came up with the Nobel Peace Prize sort of to make up for that. Like so many other pursuits in life, scientists typically complain about being underfunded and not having enough time. Yeah, if only we had all the time and money in the world, then every scientific study would be perfect. But not all of them are. And sometimes they're just too small of a study size. And so it's just not as good a science as it could be, doing the best with what we have. Other times people cut corners. There's a lot of pressure for scientists to publish their work. And so when they get results that they think this isn't going to make it into a publication, they change. They do something else. They ignore those sets of data. They throw them out. Some people have gone so far as to just make up data, to change the numbers, to fabricate data. And that is absolutely a huge no-no in science. And if they're caught, I've actually known scientists who've been basically disbarred, lost their jobs for either falsifying data or plagiarizing someone else's work. And those are big no-nos in a classroom, but in the world of science as well. Point of all this, science is not a perfect institution. It does not have a corner on truth. There are many different ways of studying the wonderful world around us, right? Science is just one of those ways. It's one discipline. One of the reasons that I bring a lot of these up is just to point out, A, that science is not perfect, but also to warn you to look out for wolves in sheep's clothing. What do I mean by this? Well, not everywhere in the world, but at least in America, science is pretty well trusted. You put a lab coat on somebody and other people say, that's a scientist. I think they know what they're talking about. And that's built on decades, if not a couple of centuries now, of hard work to be open, honest, and transparent in what goes on. I mean, you look at those drug ads that you see on TV and they list all these different ads, and may result in death. What kind of advertisement is that? Well, that's part of the process of science. We want to be transparent and open and honest. And that does gain a level of trust. But this then opens the door for other people to shortcut that, to say, I'm a scientist, to make that claim, but not to actually do the science. Some people call this pseudoscience, fake science. Basically, you're dressing up like a scientist, but you're not doing the science. Who cares, you say? They're just trying to sell a product. Yeah, I agree with you. That's fine. At the end of the day, a lot of science has to be sold as well. All the research that pharmaceutical companies do you think that costs nothing? No, that's expensive stuff. They want to see that product marketed at the end of the day and sold for a high price so that their company can make money. Also, hopefully, so they can help people, but also so they can make money to fund more research to help more people. All right, so that's one aspect of things. But what about people that want to sell you something but don't want to actually do the science? Or who do such a poor job of the science and only report the good stuff, ignoring all the bad? Well, that kind of leaves you with maybe a dangerous product in your hands because you don't know what the side effects are, or maybe something that doesn't work at all. Okay, so it doesn't work. No harm, no foul. Well, maybe. What if you have somebody that's facing a serious disease? They're desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. They're faced with either treatment A, prescribed by the doctor, that unfortunately there's one drug available for it and it costs $1,000 a month. Can't afford that. Treatment B, I saw this advertised on the internet. My aunt's friend told her about that product. She told me about this thing, and it's only $59.95 for a 2-month supply. Which are you going to go with? You're going to go with the one that seems like the better option. They both seem scientific. Both doctors are telling me about this. I saw the doctor on the website for option B. It seemed perfectly great. Well, if it's legitimate, but if it's just somebody kind of dressing up like a scientist, but doesn't have data to back up their claims, then somebody might be foregoing valid treatment, even if it does have a list of pretty nasty potential side effects, for something that may not work at all. And that's where pseudoscience gets pretty dangerous. So that's the main reason I bring this up. In your future career in the health field, no doubt you're going to have patients bringing you printouts of websites. They're going to show it on their phone. They're going to talk about some herbal supplement that their aunt's friend's brother's neighbor brought up to them, and they looked at the website and, gee, it looks legitimate. What do you think? I want you to be able to evaluate that. To be able to know, what does good science look like? What does it look like when it's too good to be true? If there's no side effects listed, doesn't that worry you? If you find it on the internet, but nowhere else do you see any published studies on this thing, shouldn't some alarms go off that some science has not been done or some corners have been cut? You should be able to basically be able to evaluate that information for yourself. You don't have to be skeptical just because it's on the internet or just because it's advertised on TV, but you should be able to dig a little deeper and get to the bottom of it and say, does this have evidence that supports that it does what it says that it does?